Okay, good morning. Welcome, everybody. I am super excited to say that today is the launch of Voyado's Retail Radar Report, and we're going to be discussing the state of the new abnormal, because there's a lot to talk about when we look at the macro trends within that. So bear with me, we'll get the laptop moving. But when we look at the macro trends that we've seen, so we'll get into the Retail Radar Report, but the retail landscape is constantly evolving. So there's a lot that we can unpack today on this webinar. We've seen things such as a post-pandemic era, cost of living crisis, inflation at all-time sky high. And so in terms of the knock-on effect that has on consumers, we're going to be unpacking some of the kind of key trends that we've seen within the Retail Radar Report. And I'm really excited that we have two unbelievable panelists, so two of our industry experts with us today. In terms of introduction, so my name is Katie. I'm a partner manager here at Voyado. And alongside me, we have the likes of Sarah and Lovey. Sarah, if you could please introduce yourself.
Take yourself off mute. Hi there, everyone. Very, very happy to be here. My name's Sarah McVitie, and I'm one of the co-founders at Dretherpy. And we build kind of predictive AI specifically for fashion retailers, helping to transform the front end experience, but also helping to deliver predictions on the supply chain as well. That's me.
Over to you, Lovey.
Hi, I'm Loive. I work at Millennium Viewer. I'm the CRM and loyalty specialist. I've been working for Millennium Viewer since 2019, and I'm super excited since I personally love when these indexes come out. So it's a great way for us companies to look at the industry and benchmark against.
Awesome. So before we dive in, let's touch upon the Retail Radar Report. I'm super excited because it's the first year that we've launched not just the UK, but also the Benelux report. But the Retail Radar Report, over the last 4 years or so, we've really understood that because of those macro trends that are constantly evolving, we want to help our retailers truly understand those consumer trends and really unpack what are the different nuances around consumer behavior. So we've got a few QR codes at the end of the webinar as well for each market, but again, we'll dive into those kind of key themes that we're going to be looking at. So again, shopping in a post-pandemic era, brand communication and its impact on shopping habits, interesting gender and the nuances around gender and generational approaches when it comes to shopping as well. So lots to unpack. Let's dive into the first topical point. So is the high street really dead? We've seen that 52% of our respondents believe that the death of the high street is imminent. But then interestingly, 51% of these consumers believe that they need to go in and physically see that product so that they can trust, the retailer themselves. Lovey, I'd love to hear from you, given the fact that you guys have brick and mortar stores. Does this resonate with what you're seeing? Are you seeing that your customers are still demanding to be in store as well as the online presence?
We see that our customer wants to be in our stores. And for us, we can see an increase in footfall after, of course, post-pandemic. And we also see our stores as like our brand homes, a chance for our customers to view the brand 360 degrees. So I think it actually is both very important to us and the customer.
And Sarah, would you say when we look at technology specifically, right, but bridging the gap between the online and the offline, what are the challenges there and where have you seen it be quite successful?
I would agree. I think what we see is that so obviously online is still growing to some extent, but I think post-pandemic, I think the stores become increasingly important. I think as retail becomes more competitive, the brand store is a place for that theatre and that brand experience to really come to life. And I think from a technology point of view, it's making sure the consumer doesn't really care how they first interact with you, whether it's on social or TikTok or online or in store, but they want their experience to be consistent across all of those channels. So I think if they've bought something online, they want you to know that when they come into your store. So I think to Lovey's point, it's about making that 360 piece really work and making your stores as gorgeous and as full of the brand as possible. I think there's a very good example. It's been around for a while now, but the Samsung stores, you can't even buy anything in their kind of flagship stores. You can go and experience all their amazing products, but obviously you could buy it everywhere, anywhere. So actually it's more about understanding what the brand stands for, what those real key visionary pieces are. And I think that's the beauty of, but making sure it's consistent and it's all connected is really important. So I think the omni-channel becomes more important, and the technology needs to be consistent across all of those different components.
I think we touched upon it, didn't we, offline, around the consumer doesn't really understand that the brand is a different experience regardless of which channel. So for them, they look at the brand, they don't necessarily see different channels as having to have different experiences. We want everything as conveniently as possible. But Lovey, I guess, what are the challenges that you've seen, or what kind of advice would you have for retailers when it comes to rolling out a brick and mortar strategy?
I think to have the brand experience consistent, like Sarah just mentioned, I mean, consumers want to be able to go online, look at what we have, our selection. They want to be able to see, do we have it in store? They want to be able to trust that when they go to the store that we have the items. They also want to be able to order online and return in store, go find another size. So it really needs to be, like Sarah just mentioned, it needs to be consistent all the way through.
It's interesting you touch upon returns there, because I think we could probably talk about returns all day here at Voyado, and I know we've got some interesting conversation to unpack here as well. When we look at the Nordic specific data, we've seen a decrease of 20% of consumers who are returning in e-commerce, and we've seen an increase of 5% of them returning in store. So I think, given the post-pandemic era, right, a lot of consumers are going in store, that omni piece. I know as a consumer, I want to make sure that if I buy something online and I'm in the high street, I can then deliver that. But what do you see? I know, Sarah, you had some really interesting kind of ideologies around behavior, around return behavior, but how can we minimize that, right? Because I think it's kind of one of the biggest pain points for so many retailers.
Yeah, interesting. In the UK, we see slightly different stats. So for the retailers that we work with, we see that actually, although returns went down during COVID because people were buying less kind of fit specific products, they're now actually back up to kind of pre-pandemic or even beyond pre-pandemic levels. And I think understanding that returns is as much about what suits me, what works for me, what works for my wardrobe. And sometimes sizing is an issue, but more often it's people buying multiple dresses or multiple tops or multiple different types of items and seeing what works for them at home. And so I think it's really about understanding, if you're looking to reduce returns, making sure you're showing people things that they will actually buy and keep. And if your return rates are 30, 40, 50% of your base, then if you're recommending things based on purchases, you're getting it wrong 30, 40, 50% of the time. So it's really important to include the returns in that when you're building those recommendations into customers. And I think also understanding that the in-store piece is key. And I think increasingly we're seeing in the UK that retailers are charging for returns, but not if you take it in store, which is a huge bonus if you're an omnichannel retailer, because you get them to come into your store, return the item, and actually they're there as a customer looking to buy other things. So I think there's lots of things that probably shows why the increase is there in store. But it's making sure, again, that it's a connected experience to really drive a kind of 360 experience for the customer.
Yeah, I think how we can influence return behavior is quite interesting, especially from a brand communication standpoint, Lovey. But even that piece around 16% would abandon the orders if they had to pay for a return. I know that's a pain point for me when I've seen that be introduced. But is that something you guys have explored, or do you have an opinion on, I guess, how you can influence return behavior, whether that be loyalty or implementing something such as a return fee?
I think Sarah makes a good point there. We also do not experience a decrease in returns, and when talking to industry colleagues, it's the same, but we also have to educate the customer again because in the pandemic, we kind of taught the customer that this is how you shop. Just shop as much as you want and return what you don't want. And in some cases, of course, customers return everything. So in the end, it's a huge cost for companies. And also to talk about sustainability, returns it's really affecting our performance. So for if we talk about customer loyalty, we can see, however, that customers that do connect with a brand, they are much more engaged. They do return less. We also see the customers that do engage with brands, they also have like higher average order values. They have higher average baskets. So I do see a trend with a customer's engagement on their return behavior.
I think it's interesting. We do a bit of work for our clients looking at exactly that, the profitability on a per customer basis. And typically there's a very small number of customers that are responsible for the majority of the returns. And some of those customers are very profitable, in which case it's just getting them to keep buying and making sure that they keep more of what they see. But for some customers, they are deeply unprofitable. So there are things you can do. And it's always a very small number, but just don't email them, so understanding, or in some cases it's a very fine line, just one more kept purchase and they're profitable again. So it's understanding and really digging into the data to state the problem and understand what is driving those return rates and what kinds of things can you put in place to encourage the right behaviors. And you're absolutely right, from a sustainability point of view, it's a huge issue, particularly if you've got trend pieces that are suddenly out of season, then you can't shift them and then you get terminal stock. So also educating the customer to understand that, and from a retailer's perspective, where online was growing so quickly, it's now not growing as much. So online now needs to turn into a profit center, it's not the big growth center it was. So I think it's really important that people start to focus on this at a very granular level as well.
I think we also need to look at like having return policies that give us quality customers and customer experiences. I think that's also super important.
Really good point. To keep on the theme or the topic of returns quickly, because I think the brand communications is a really interesting slide for me. It's one of my favorite slides, and the 30% lower return rate we see with communication, right? But you've actually mentioned a really interesting point there, Sarah. Sometimes you don't want to be sending that email. I guess Lovey, firstly, from your opinion here in terms of the right brand communication and how impactful that can be when it's done correctly.
Yeah, I mean, totally true. I mean, what we always do and try to do, and when we talk about this internally, and we try to also like test what works for different customers, so we can actually, like when we actually want to communicate with the customer, whether it's on email or it's social media or it's paid social or wherever in store, we know what the customer wants and we know when to communicate it.
It's an interesting one. This slide for me becomes a bit twofold, and it comes into the next slide that we'll get into, because what really interests me here is that we're seeing women are tapping into communication a lot more than men. So up to 50% increase in SMS text messages. I know I am guilty of that. I have several text messages from brands on the daily, and maybe we'll have an interesting discussion on how impactful can that be. But what we are seeing is that 45% increase in savings. So Sarah, you take the floor here, because you had some really interesting points around women. Are we more savvy potentially when it comes to a discount? Like, why do you think women are saving more than men?
I think it's twofold. I think what we see in the UK is typically if a lot of women are buying for the household, so they're buying for the kids, they're buying for, depending on the age of the customer and the whether they're in that kind of household situation, I think they are more actively looking for discounts because it makes their household budget go a lot further. And we definitely see that. And I think men who shop for them, so typically we also see that a lot of women are buying menswear, but when men are shopping for themselves, then they typically will have more disposable income in that regard as well. So I think it's that piece. And then I think everyone loves a bargain, right? So who doesn't love a bargain? So it's kind of making sure that, and I think when you're more likely to sign up for those discounts and those emails, and often people offer you a discount for those emails. So I think it's making sure you don't have to pay full price. So are we as brands educating customers to wait for the discount, I suppose, as well?
Yeah. And Lovey, what are your views on that when it comes to, I guess, omni-channel communications as well, like making sure we're in front of the customers wherever they are? Like, do you see that to be an impactful strategy to help with retention and growth as well?
I do. And I think that's such a good thought from Sarah. I think women are so much more taking care of the household purchases, so they do know how to kind of find that discount. And I think it's also a huge impact on brands, how we've trained the customer on discounts. And also it's super hard, the landscape. I mean, we can see that like almost all multi-brands, they work with discounts almost every month. So it's a very competitive landscape when it comes to like discounted communication as well. And I think we are greatly responsible in that and how we train the customer to shop. And now it's about like kind of trying to pull back a little bit, but making it count where it should.
Yeah.
I think you also have to bear in mind that, in the cost of living crisis that we have, people are really looking to, and obviously in many ways, some of these categories are discretionary purchases. So I think it's to be understood as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. This slide really does fascinate me. And actually, after speaking about it at depth, it does make a lot of sense. But the fact that seniors are 9.6% more click-through rate than Gen Z, is that common, or are we surprised by this? I know I was, but actually I think there's a good discussion here in terms of how we engage with brands. So take the floor, Sarah. What are your thoughts on this?
I mean, I think this is so interesting, but I think I look at my kids and they just have the attention span of a gnat. They've got so, I think if I look at YouTube, it's this constant barrage for attention, and they've got so many things vying for their attention. So I think for that younger generation, you've got to be so on point, you've got to be so relevant, you've got to hit them with exactly the message and exactly the products that they're going to want to buy, because you just have such a small attention span. And if it doesn't hit the mark, they're off somewhere else where it will hit the mark. And I think the older generation has less of that. They're more engaged with the brands that they engage with, and so they're probably more loyal in that respect as well.
And do you see that as well, Lovey? I think one thing to point out is that Gen Z are now evolving as well, right? A lot of Gen Zs now have their own careers and jobs. So how are you seeing that in terms of a strategy to attract and acquire Gen Z?
I mean, I think we can see that Gen Z doesn't just go on email. I mean, they are all over the place. And I mean, I think brands really need to think about the best way to kind of get in touch. And like Gen Z is like probably the most conscious shopper we have. They're also like the biggest generation there has been. They're about 25% of the like population. So I think I think we all just kind of are trying to find our way with Gen Z.
Yeah, and I want to touch upon it as well, mainly from an omni-channel perspective, because when I look at this data, so you kind of touched upon it here in terms of 20% of Gen Z are looking for whether that brand is credible around sustainability, but we're seeing they're a lot more frequently shopping and a lot lower average order value. So the way I kind of see that, to Sarah's point, is they're shopping, but there's so much information that Gen Zs could be taking in, right? And actually getting in front of them on any channel and getting their attention is quite difficult. But it's a nice conversation around omni-channel as well. Like, how can you be present on every channel and make it engaging? Like, do you see that being quite a challenge, Lovey, in any way?
I don't see that as a challenge, but it means that like that needs to be a company policy. So like everybody is working towards the same thing. It's not just like how we represent ourselves in the stores or on email or on social or on TikTok or YouTube. It's also how we like internally speak about the brand outside the company.
And Sarah, what are your thoughts, I guess, in terms of technology? How can we help retailers ensure that they've got the right tech incumbent to facilitate online and offline?
I think it all comes down to being as relevant as possible. So I think really taking the time to use all the data that you have to understand each individual customer at a very detailed level, to be able to present to them things so understanding their intent in the moment, understanding what they're there for, understanding they talk about sustainability, but do they really care about it? Some do, some don't. So where do they sit on that? And I think there's enough data now that is available both from your own websites and through all the other social channels that you actually have everything you need to be able to put together a very informed strategy that really delivers for that generation. And I think the average receipts is, again, they're very savvy in finding voucher codes and discount codes, and they're very savvy in just making sure that whole shopping journey for them is as good as possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we also see that kind of like an older generation is much more into like long form communication. We can see like a rise in like newsletter, like Substack and So, and you want to be relevant when you talk to the customer. And then you have Gen Z that is kind of like in much like they spend time on different platforms. You have much less attention span. So I think it's super interesting if brands want to cater to both an older generation and Gen Z, because you can't really cater to everybody. How are you going to do that?
I think the other thing that we do a lot of A/B testing. So really understanding who your different personas are and who your different customer segments are, and then testing different personalized communication, whether it's online or in store or via social, just making sure that that is, and then those A/B tests are very good at delivering the results on that piece.
Same for us. We do a lot of A/B testing, not just with like, it's how we communicate, when we communicate, it's the imagery, it's how often we do it. Is it with different types of customers? Is it customers that primarily shop online? Is it with high returners? Is it with people who shop both online and in store? And we use this a lot in how we continue and build our communication strategy.
And I think also now that the data is more accessible, you can do things like, here's your best edit, here's what's available in store. So this is what, this is, and you can actually go and try it on, and this will go with that piece you bought last week or last year. So you can really deliver a really gorgeous experience now. And I think the data is there and the technology is there to facilitate more than just a kind of one size fits all blast out email. You can be very, very discreet about how you choose to and how you want to communicate with the different types of customers.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we've covered a lot of themes, right? I think what's clear is that the last few years have been somewhat of a whirlwind in terms of post-pandemic, how consumers are changing. I think from a personal aspect, have you guys both seen that firsthand, that consumers are really changing the way that they shop? Like, what are your biggest takeaways for retailers to adapt to a new world?
We see our customers really picking quality over quantity. So in terms of what our customers shopping, they want not just quality from the clothing, but the all-around experience.
Yeah, and Sarah, have you seen it, I guess, working with various different brands, that's a big shift as well for you guys?
I think prices, I think there's so many different factors depending on where the retailers play in price and who their target audience is. I think we're seeing that data needs to play an increasingly important part in that journey. I think relevancy becomes increasingly important, and it truly, really delivering that very personalized experience makes a big difference to the results. I think you see customers increasingly, they are looking for discounts, they are looking to make their budget, which is smaller, work and for the same amount of purchasing as they were doing before. And I think there's lots of interesting questions around. You look at the rise of Shein, and you look at, I think there's they are a data-driven data business, and rightly or wrongly, however we all feel about that, there's something very interesting to understand about how they are approaching that market. So I think there's lots of learnings, and I think, but again, we do see for the higher price retailers that the quality, to your point, is the key piece. So people are looking for better quality that lasts longer. But I think sustainability is a luxury still for customers. And if they are in a position where they can choose to shop sustainably, then they do. But if not, I don't think they're quite there yet.
It's a juxtaposition where we want convenience, we want to be able to access product wherever we are, but then Gen Z, one of the biggest generations that we need to focus on in terms of growth are looking for sustainability. So how do we balance that? I think it's a really tough challenge in many ways.
And I think a lot of that's around communication, right? I think we have it's our job to communicate with the consumer and help them to understand that if we buy this slightly higher price item, it's going to last longer. Yeah. It's much more versatile. You can wear it in lots of different ways for lots of different occasions. And I think it's that piece that makes it suddenly a great value purchase and a great investment piece versus just going to buy something cheaply off a kind of fast fashion space. So
yeah, I totally agree with that.
Amazing. I'm going to open the floor to any questions, and then following that, we've got some more information on the Retail Radar report. But to recap, whilst we will look at these questions, we've covered a lot around returns. We've covered a lot around, omni-channel. I think there's a lot to unpack in terms of how we can help retailers, relevantly send out those messages to consumers. So I'm going to open the floor. One question we have for you, Lovey, is how do you work with discounts to promote full price shoppers?
So we actually, when we first started with Boyato, this is a long answer, I'm so sorry. When we first started with the Boyato, we had a different solution. So what we actually found out when we launched is that we had a lot of customer data, but we didn't have the correct data. So the first thing we did was kind of, what do we want from our customers? Asked ourselves these questions to get kind of to the relevant data that we wanted. Then we actually started to do a huge test on how our customers perceive discount. So we actually invited our customers in, and for customers that didn't shop the first month, we offered them a 10% discount off their first purchase. And we could actually see with months of testing that the customers that didn't shop with the discount, they actually became much more, they were much more engaged with our brand, and the customer that shopped with the discount, firstly, they churned much faster. So what we do is we try to have very segmented communication regarding discounts and full price shoppers, and we try to kind of keep our full price customers, full price.
And Sarah, on the online and offline, what advice do you have for creating that experience online and offline?
So I think we work very specifically with fashion and apparel retailers, but I think all retailers that we work with, they're trying to recreate that gorgeous experience when you go into a store and someone goes, "Oh, hey there, hey Katie, I've got just the thing. Here's your perfect edit." And I think it's making sure that can be delivered online. So it's not about pushing your bestsellers or what's trending. It's about saying, right, Katie's here. We know she loves white shirts. We know she hates white jeans or whatever it is. So we're going to present stuff to her that is really gorgeous, that's really on brand, that really delivers for what she's looking for. And then making sure that that information is available to you in store via an app, or making sure that it's available to the store staff via clienteling. So that is a very consistent experience, however you're shopping. And I think it's putting that service back into retail. So whether that's through really personalized outfitting, showing the versatility of every product, particularly for higher priced items. If you're looking at a gorgeous white tuxedo blazer, understanding that I can wear it like this for work, like this in the evening, like this at the weekend, and suddenly that expensive item becomes a really great piece to wear. So I think it's about trying to replicate that experience that your best store staff deliver in store, but delivering that online. And now it is, the advent of AI at scale it's very possible to do all of those things. I think it's very exciting for brands to be able to genuinely get very, very much closer to that in-store experience with an online piece, and making sure it's consistent and that information is available to you as a shopper wherever you go as well.
Absolutely. I think one thing I love about working at Boyato is actually helping and understanding how to help retailers bridge the gap between the offline and the online, that simplified view of a customer, which can be quite hard to implement at times, right? So to be able to create that strategy around that, I know as a shopper, I want to make sure that if I'm buying online, it's the same experience in store. So it's really good input. We have a question here around the importance of segmentation across strategy, right? So do you think it's important to have a segmentation strategy for different generations, touching upon Gen Z and the older generation? Do you think we need to segment across different?
I think that we also touched on it a little bit earlier, but it's the different generations and different customers. They don't want necessarily the same thing, and also as the first question with discounts. Not everybody is looking for discounts, even though a lot of people are looking for discounts. It's also about like showing the customer the right things that they want to get them to convert or to get them to engage. And it might not always be to like try to push a purchase on them. It's also about like, how do we communicate as a brand to our customers? And yeah, because it's a two-way street. We want the customers to engage back.
Where
So
does
segmentation,
I'm curious around A/B testing that as well? Have you been able to over the years A/B test different demographics and segmentations on that as well?
Yeah, we do that, and we try to continuously do that because we're in fashion, and like how fashion works is that we launch a new collection 4 times a year. So what applied to the last collection might not apply to this collection. We have different like shapes, we have different fabrics, we might have something that Gen Z loves, or we might have something that is really appealing to an older generation. So it's super important to like also like continuously test and test and test and test.
I think the other thing with fashion that we see is that it's not necessarily an age thing. It's sometimes it's a fashionability piece. So part of what we do at Dressip is we break all the products down into very detailed, consistent bits of product data as a stylist would see them. So things like understanding if you have trend-based customers, and in that case, understanding that what they bought last year, they loved or hated velvet last year. The velvet's a key trend this year. They won't just like it, they're going to go and buy it. So what matters about that customer is their propensity to buy into trend. And I think understanding that fashion is a very different segment, and so the way you capture and create and then use the data is very different, because this newness piece is very real. And so how you segment customers is sometimes based on confidence, or it's based on trend, but sometimes ages can be an important factor, but sometimes there are other bigger things that you can segment them by that will drive better behavior. So it's understanding the customers at a very detailed level to understand what segments will work better.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can see Julie has raised a hand in the room. If you're able to put all questions into the chat so that we can speak of them up here, but I don't think we can unmute any of the guests, unfortunately. A question from Sophia. So have you put labels, created automations based on customer sustainability's interest?
So we do that actually for a number of our customers. One of the things that we look at is the sustainability of the products, both in terms of the fabric and the traceability. And so one of the tags that we add is that sustainability piece. So as customers navigate around the site, we will understand whether they have a propensity to prefer the sustainable items, and then that can become a segment if you want to as well. So there's lots you can do around that to understand how many of your customers are driven by sustainability.
That's an interesting topic, actually. Love it. And when it comes to sustainability, like what kind of key successes have you seen to really push that and resonate with customers today?
I mean, like Sarah says, we also label our garments on site where you can kind of see their overview. We showcase the certificates that we have related to sustainability on site, but we have not actually created any automation based on like customer sustainability interest, but we do more automations based on tracking certain customer behaviors. For example, serial returners, and that's just one type of like behavioral type automation that we do to track customers. And then we also have automations based on other types of behaviors that we would want to track, but we don't have anything based on customer sustainability interest.
So when you're tracking serial returners, because I mean I've been guilty of that in the past, right, where I've been panicking, I'm going out that evening and I've not got the outfit that I want, so I bought maybe several items, right, then I've returned half. How do you, I guess, influence that behavior to say, look, we want to ensure that we mitigate those returns on those side and encourage better behavior?
Well, we have certain levels of serial returning. So at each level, we try to connect with the customers on trying to kind of change that behavior and to kind of understand on why these people return so much, or and also explain like what an effect that has on not just like the environment, but also us, and our relationship with the customer.
Yeah, we do quite a lot on returns for our clients. We build a kind of return rate report where we, rather than relying necessarily on reason codes, looking at what the data is telling you about why things get returned, and then usually some very clear things that retailers can do to start to mitigate that. So we look at people who buy the same product in multiple sizes over any number of orders versus people put multiple options of the same category within an order, so you can see whether it's a size or a style issue, and then we do that by category, and then you can see how that changes over time. So there's a lot of things you can do with your own data to understand what the key drivers are, and then usually there's some very specific actions that you can take to have quite a significant reduction in return rates. So we had one retailer where their alphanumeric sizing, they had 4 of one and 6 of another, and it just didn't. So there's some very simple things you can do to help communicate differently to decrease returns as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Really good insight. We have a question around community. So this goes in for Lovey, for you, around loyalty. But the question is, how do you work with loyalty programs to create that community, that brand feeling and presence?
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about community in today's market, but community is built on like a two-way communication streak. So how we work with our loyalty program is also to listen to our customers. So I think that's the biggest factor, and see what they like, how they engage with us. Yeah. So not just look at data and not only like, so we look at data, I mean, and try to communicate with our customers in the way that they want to be communicated with.
Do you have a particular channel that you, I guess, see more success on, or that you prefer? I know we can't have favorites, but
I think it's the collective of channels that we're all saying the same thing at the same time. I think that's important.
So I'll leave the chat open for any other questions. And as we move on, just to share our Retail Radar report. So today is the launch. If we haven't announced it enough already, I'm really excited to say that we've got the Nordic report as usual, but then also the UK and Benelux Retail Radar report. Thank you so much to our hosts. It's been so fascinating having you both on to talk about both of your experiences. And then any other questions we can take offline, and I will also make sure that we share the follow-up collateral as well. So we have lots to share in terms of the on-demand webinar, and also the report that will be going out at 11 o'clock today as well.